All right, welcome back. As promised, here is chapter three, part two. And I want to talk about what our themes for this lecture are going to be. We are going to talk about the history of electronic gaming and, of course, the evolution of electronic gaming. I think the two are definitely related, right? I want to discuss a little bit about gaming as a social medium, how it has really become part of our culture and how we relate to one another. Both the good, the bad, and the ugly, I should say, right? And then finally, the role of digital gaming in our democratic society. And as part of that, I'm going to be talking about the business end of it here near the back end of this lecture. Once again, make sure that you listen carefully because I will be giving out a code word in part two that you can later use for a quiz or exam. And yeah, so let's get going here, ladies and gentlemen. All right, let's go back. Let's get back in our time machine here. And one of the things that's very interesting about talking about mass media is where does it start and where we are now? And a lot of modern forms of again of stuff that we enjoy, film, television, radio, not music obviously has a unique history on its own, but certainly how we listen to music. And of course, video gaming, right? They're all related in terms of most of the most of what we know or how we view this content, etc., started during the Industrial Revolution. And again, the Industrial Revolution happened in the 1800s. In fact, it happened. I would say the majority of it happened in the latter half of the 19th century. So that would be, basically 1850s and on, and then of course into the early 1900s. And what the Industrial Revolution basically did was it made this country, which was very rural, agricultural based, into industry based, factory based. And these factories needed people, needed humans to run them, right? And so not only were you seeing people here in the U.S. that native U.S. folks getting into industry here, but you saw an incredible influx of immigration from folks from other countries, particularly Northern Europe, coming here in the latter part of the 19th century to participate in it. Now, basically, if you were to go back into a time machine and kind of exist, if you will, post Civil War in the 1800s, particularly as we get closer to the turn of that century into the 19th and 20th century, you would have spent a lot of time working, a lot of manual labor, heavy duty stuff, and then once you weren't doing that, there would be this ability to want to just have some kind of release, some kind of takeaway from it. Plus, you had a little bit more money in your pocket. So that led to what was called leisure time, right? Which mass consumption, we were obviously consuming lots of different goods. Our democracy was growing. Capitalism was becoming a thing. And on the back end of that, of course, that also means that you have money to burn, if you will. So there was leisure time. So one of the industries that benefited was what was the precursor to the video game industry, which was just gaming in general, right? Which is mechanical gaming. So there were what are called penny arcades, which basically were the first thoroughly modern indoor playground containing coin-operated counter machines. And I've got an example of that. For example, in the 1880s, the emergence of coin-operated contraptions first appeared in train depots, hotel lobbies, bars, restaurants. They were called leisure machines, and eventually they found a permanent home in the first indoor playground known as the penny arcade. Arcades were like nurseries for fledgling forms of amusement that would mature into mass entertainment industries during the 20th century. You had automated phonographs used in arcade machines, which evolved into the jukebox. Some of these machines were strength testers that dared young men to show off their muscles. So right away, we see that these had an appeal to more men than women. There were simulated bowling, horse racing, football, and the one that I think is the most fascinating is pinball. You might have heard of pinball. Well, it was not always called pinball. the first version of it was called Bagatelle, and the book talks about it as well. Bagatlle, Bagatelle. And basically, it was the most prominent of these mechanical games early on. Now, the interesting part about Bagatelle is that basically, well, before I forget there, let me stay here for a second. Is that it did not come initially with those flipper bumpers that where you can, you knock the ball, up into the thing and you score more points. So it was considered a game. Bagatelle was considered a game of chance. The government wasn't happy about it, and so the government basically tried to shall we say, ban it from use because it was considered kind of not good, right? Well, those manufacturers of those Bagatelle machines figured out if we used the flipper bumper that there was actual skill involved. And so actually pinball machines became not just prominent in the late 80s, but certainly back I want to say in 1950, 1945 or 50 post World War II, they became popular again because they were, able to game manufacturers were able to create those without government getting in the way saying it was gambling. So kind of fun little story. Read up on it. Speaking of the 20th century and speaking of video games, the first video game patent actually happened in 1948, and it was for the cathode ray tube amusement. And let me just read you a little bit about what that is. Sorry, guys, something in my throat here. So the first patent was issued in December 1948 to Thomas T. Goldsmith and Estill Ray Mann, Thomas T. Goldsmith and Estill Ray Mann, for what they described as the cathode ray tube amusement device. And it was interesting because it was actually used for early television. It provided images for analog television and early computer displays. And then, of course, computer geeks developed games using CRT, first as a novelty, but then later to become a big consumer thing. In fact, in 1972, Odyssey, Magnavox's Odyssey, makes its debut on home video game systems. And it would cost you, by the way, the equivalent of $600 during that time. But that Odyssey game basically had, which was released in 1972, had a 12-game inventory of simple aiming and sports games. And Magnavox, obviously the manufacturer, sold 300,000 units, so it became very popular. Of course, arcades also were still around, pinball being the most popular, skee ball, those kinds of things. And those were obviously, at least early, if you were to fly back into the 1970s, you would see a majority of, that's what an arcade would be consisting of, would be coin-operated games that were not video in nature yet. That comes a little bit later. Well, along with Odyssey, Atari comes along, and the guy who created Atari, his name was Nolan Bushnell, and you should know that name because he was really kind of the founding father, I would say, of the modern video game. And it's interesting because he actually created a game called Pong, which I know I mentioned, I think, earlier in either chapter 1 or 2, where the paddles were here and you just see a blip go back and forth. That's the first game I played at age 10, right? Was this Pong game. It was the first video game popular in arcades, and basically a home version was marketed through a deal with Sears in 1975. So in 1975, Atari and Sears teamed up basically to essentially take the game, which was on television, and now start to create content gaming for arcades. And so we started to see this whole new era where we had Missile Command, Asteroids, and you would walk into a arcade and not just see pinball games, but you started to see video games as well. Now, one quick note about Nolan Bushnell that I think you should know is that he actually sold Atari early, and he sold it for just $28 million. Basically, our Atari folded in 1984, but it plowed the field for Nintendo, Sony, and Microsoft, transformed the video game industry. So anyway, just a little history. As for home consoles, because that's where we started originally, they were, basically measured in speed and graphics, and of course that was like the bit is kind of like where synonymous with speed and graphics. And basically games started out as 8-bit. They expanded eventually to 200, or I should say, evolved to 256-bit. And basically you can kind of trace the start of, I should say, the lineage of how these games kind of came to be for home entertainment, right? You had the Atari 2600 introduced in 1977. Nintendo released its system in 1983. Sega 1989, and of course, market systems don't really market in bits anymore. But obviously, the graphics are next level. Major home console makers, right? And this is who we have today, I guess, would be Nintendo, Sony, and Microsoft. And of course, Nintendo, is known for Wii Sports and Super Mario Brothers. In fact, I still remember, a lot of people don't realize this, but I remember playing a game in an arcade called Donkey Kong, which of course later Nintendo put in home units as well. And Donkey Kong was the initial game that had the Super Mario character. And then of course Super Mario became his own kind of like offshoot of that, right? In any event, Sony, of course, came along with its PlayStation series, and of course Microsoft has Xbox. And I'm sure you are either, if you've got something at home that you play other than on your phone. My guess is it's likely either a PlayStation or an Xbox. Some of you still have Nintendo, I think. So anyway, how about the evolution of this right here, games on phones? Well, it's interesting because a lot of people just assume that kind of Nintendo was the first to popularize handheld digital games, and that's kind of the easy answer right there with Game Boy, if you guys remember that. Maybe some of you still have that in a closet somewhere, your parents do. But what's interesting is there was actually a game that preceded a model or a series that preceded Nintendo that was made by Mattel. And I don't have a picture of it off the top here, but basically it was a, hold on, I do, please. Okay, sorry for that quick edit. I had some issues going on with my screen here. So I wanted to share with you what this was, this Nintendo portable gaming. That's what we were talking about. And basically, that's what it looked like. It was a classic football game, and there was a hockey game, basketball game, a series of these things that you could actually play with. And this was in like the late 70s, early 80s. It was so that was like actually the first handheld game. So I think every now and then when I see that in the book, I always kind of amused at the fact that, it wasn't, it was, they always talk about the Game Boy being first, but that was actually what was first. All right, let me share with you back our PowerPoint here. Let me get back to that. Now we're on the right page. Okay. The point is, with the portable players, mobile gaming, these handheld games, if you will, basically games are no longer confined to arcades or home television. So you didn't have to play in front of a console. You didn't have to go to an arcade. You could play it right in your hand. And of course, now those games have been basically kind of absorbed into our phones, and we play our games on our phones. So that's why the mobile gaming universe, if you will, has become really, iPhone / Google Android centric. In any event, it increased profile and flexibility across platforms, and of course now the gaming industry is on par with television and film, and that has a lot to do with the evolution of the mobile gaming universe. All right. With the rise of course, the internet, gaming world has been transformed, as we talked about in Chapter 2, when the internet came along, in particular for us in the 90s, mid to late 90s, early 2000s. It's really kind of revolutionized the video game industry. And of course, now gaming has emerged as an online multiplayer social activity. So it's not just one-on-one. So to paint you a picture, back in the day when I had my first series, which was first video game series, which was called Intellivision, there would be a couple of us on the couch and you'd have one joystick and that's how you played. And of course, that's not true today. In fact, I think one thing that's always struck me when we were going through COVID and having two teenagers at the time, is that's kind of how they survived. They would throw the headsets on and they would play until the, 3 in the morning, and that's how they stayed social. So I think that was very interesting. That's something we just didn't have, back in the day, if you will. The internet, of course, has allowed convergence. We'll talk a little bit more about that. It's opened the door to social gaming and virtual worlds. And of course, we have some other terms like MMORPG and MOBA, which we'll get into here in just a bit under communities of play. How about convergence? Consoles to mobile gaming. Digital games made an initial appearance on computers and now consoles, of course. Games can now be consumed the same way music, books, TV, films are consumed, like on the go, which is super cool and, of course, has made it very popular. Consoles have become major entertainment centers, right? So, you could play a DVD out of your Xbox. You could, go online, etc. That's all stuff that was much more recent in terms of its evolution, right? And we talked about, obviously, these social gaming and virtual worlds. Here's some video game genres, if you will. Here's what people prefer to play. I know it's kind of blurry, but I'll go over it. Action, basically action games, action adventure. So if you add up action adventure, you're looking at literally almost 70%, or even if you include the adventure below it. So almost just about the first three are very like high adrenaline type of games, right? You go down to casual, strategy, sports, only 25% popularity, but not bad, but there's your genres that people prefer. All right, let's talk about communities of play real quick. Got a little discussion about that. And basically, there's a term that appears in your book called collective intelligence. And collective intelligence is defined as describing the internet's ability to enable us to share our knowledge and acknowledge it to others. So this really does fall into the social aspect of how gaming, I should say, has become kind of a social hub, right? But in any event, there are key ways of the collective intelligence appears in gaming. One is teamwork and strategy, which is in multiplayer games called MOBAs or MMO shooters. Players use chat, pings, and coordinated actions to make better decisions than any single player could, leading to improved performance and winning. There's also problem solving. Games inherently present problems, puzzles, combat exploration that players collectively tackle with a networked community, can't speak today, developing the most efficient solutions, often shared via wikis or forums. Information sharing is also part of a community of play, or part of the collective intelligence, rather. Players build vast community-driven knowledge bases that store expertise, acting as a collective memory far beyond any single player's capacity. Game improvement, for sure. Enthusiast communities leverage collective intelligence to create third-party modifications, which are called mods. That's why that term modding is up there, which is the most advanced form of collective intelligence. And modding is encouraged by game developers as a way for players to become more deeply invested in the game and improve it for others. Okay. Anyway, there is also something called, before I get into there, called emergent behavior, which is coordinated groups like those studied in simulated fish show how collective intelligence can create adaptive behaviors. So, example, coordinated evasion that benefit the group, mirroring strategies in games like World of Warcraft. So basically, you're playing these huge like game systems, right, or at least these huge social games, and there's a lot of collaboration, right? So in any event, there's also live streaming, right? Live streaming has grown in popularity, and probably the one that the most, at least the one I've heard of the most, is Twitch, which is owned by Amazon. You have YouTube gaming, you have Facebook gaming. So, a lot of these big tech companies have invested in these areas. In fact, Twitch, I believe, has in the neighborhood of 2.2 million average concurrent viewers at any given time. And there's usually 180 million on average that view, these platforms monthly, at least Twitch, I should say. And live gaming platforms have extended beyond gameplay. So they've actually spawned talk shows, believe it or not. So there's actually something called the Game Awards After Hours. It's a spin-off talk show style segment connected to the Game Awards where hosts and developers discuss games, industry news, and highlights from the award show, interviews with developers, behind the scenes commentary, and live reactions to games and announcements. And it was directly tied, as an origin, it was directly tied to video game culture and the popularity of the Game Awards, which itself celebrates the gaming industry. Other examples include Good Game Australia and segments on channels like G4 TV's X Play, which blended talk show style discussion with reviews and commentary on video games. Look at this universe that's been spawned, right? But there's also comedy series, believe it or not, based on video gaming called Mythic Quest Raven's Banquet on Apple Plus, and there's actual news events. In 2019, the Fortnite World Cup, Epic Games hosted the first global Fortnite esports tournament with a $30 million prize pool. And the news impact was team winner Kyle Bugbug Giersdorf earned $3 million. Mainstream media covered gaming as a legitimate career and esports as a serious industry. And I've already talked to you about the fact that very early on in 2016, I did the same with at Mayan Theater watching the FIFA World Cup. So very much, this falls under communities of play. And of course, last but not least, I shouldn't say last, but certainly nearly last but not least, we have online fantasy sports, right? There are millions of people that play fantasy sports. In fact, during the NFL season, I would say online fantasy football is probably the most popular of them all. But there's also for other things like golf and basketball, baseball, etc. And they emphasize detached managerial perspective, right? That you can, you're managing something and you're managing an online database, if you will. Conventions, certainly video games have spawned conventions for other to offer opportunities for video game enthusiasts to meet in person. I know that was a very challenging thing during COVID. But now, they've kind of returned back in full force, if you will. And I'm sure there's also examples of it online as well. Cosplay. This is a word I wasn't even familiar with until very recently. And it's something you're very familiar with because this is kind of more your generation. But cosplay, which first became popular in the United States at a science fiction conference. So, for example, I remember a lot of like folks that love Star Trek or the Star Trek series would show up at these conventions all over the country, dressed in their famous Star Trek characters. And I should say Star Wars does the same thing. And of course, now we're seeing cosplay connected to not just like the video game industry, but obviously animation and anime and whatnot. So in any event, that falls under communities of play within the gaming universe. So to summarize here, before we get into addiction, right? Electronic gaming and media culture is similar, if not more powerful than other mass media. It spawned content platforms and Twitch. Electronic games have inspired movies, and Hollywood blockbusters have led to companion games. Not much recently, but certainly a lot of Hollywood's inspiration has come from video games and vice versa. All right, I want to get next into what's called addiction and other concerns, because certainly you can't talk video gaming without talking about the collective nature of how addiction kind of relates to it, right? And parents, politicians, and medical establishment are concerned about the addictive quality of video gaming. In fact, I want to play this video for you real quick. There's numerous examples out there that you can easily find of people talking about video game addiction. But I thought this was a real interesting conversation. I don't know if I'm going to play the whole thing, but I certainly want to play a majority of it. She had a guest on her show, and it was basically a sit down with it was a sit down, if you will, with a guy that was addicted to video gaming and how he was trying to overcome it. And they were kind of doing this, like, I don't know, show and tell or intervention, what you want to call it. But anyway, this is Oprah. Let me stop sharing and show you the video. Where did I put it? Oh, I don't have it. Hold on. Give me a second, guys. Yeah, 1 second here. Desktop 2. Okay, and I'm going to go to here. Here she is. Okay, we should see this now.
Talking about gaming, Dr. Nisha and her son Amir are here. And tell us what's been going on, Dr. Nisha.
Hi, thanks for having me. So my name is Dr. Nisha Glenn. This is my son Amir Jenkins, and I am going to just share my experience as being a mother to a gamer. I first bought Amir his first game, I would say maybe about 5 or 6 years old. And at that time, I did not think that it would turn into an addiction because I'm so used to playing games growing up, Nintendo, Atari. But you got to keep in mind, he's a different Gen Z. I'm different. So we went outside, we played when the street lights and everything was up. So he started his gaming at about 5 or 6. And then I noticed I bought him his first game, the PlayStation 1, when it came out. And I noticed like 9 and 10, he was definitely playing the game. And as time continued to go on, when he got in high school, that's when I knew it was an addiction. One time he was in this room playing his game, which is the game called Fortnite. Oh my God, Fortnite has taken so much of my money. So he was in his room playing Fortnite. And I heard him screaming and cussing and everything. I'm like, who are you talking to? He's like, I'm arguing with some people at the game because I lost and all this. They going back and forth. And about 20 minutes later, there are 4 guys at my door. They had came to my house to fight him because I guess they lost. I'm not really sure, but come to find out they were guys that actually went to his school. So I then had to contact the school and let them know what was going on because at this point, I'm noticing this addiction is getting violent. Throughout this addiction, I noticed Amir would get up in the mornings. He would not brush his teeth. He would not eat. Ooh. It was strictly
Amir.
I mean, nothing, no showers. I'm just keeping it real. I'm just being honest. In there on the game 24 hours a day. So I noticed it affecting his education. I noticed sometimes when I would take the game, I would wake up in the middle of the night. He's in there at 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning playing the game, screaming. And I'm like, who are you talking to? So it's really bad right now. And he's 23 years old, and I still experience a lot of the same things. He's now taking showers. He's now eating a little
Brushed
bit
his
more.
teeth this morning, so good.
So, but it's still bad. I'm like, I don't want my son to be 30 years old having an addiction to games. So
do you think you have an addiction?
I would say I've gotten a lot better with it.
What does that really mean, Amir?
I would say I don't have the urge to constantly be on the game, but I feel the urge to, play the game excessively long. Now I don't play it as long as I used to.
Yeah.
Okay, Richardson, the holidays are done.
Yeah, guys.
But then Verizon
Bye-bye.
gave us their best deal.
4 new iPhone 17s, all on them.
Get 4 iPhone 17s on us, no trade-in needed, and 4 lines for just $25 a line.
Love that spirit, folks.
So
Yeah.
do you have a life? Do you work? Do you go to school?
I go to school and I work full time as well.
Okay. So you're not on it all of the time.
No.
Oh, can you take us to the point of understanding what that feels like when you're sort of caught up in the obsession of it?
I would say you almost forget where you are in a sense. Like when I play the game, I literally forget I'm in a house sometimes. It's so virtual, so intimate, and it's free, in the judge-free zone as well.
Mm-hmm. You've done extensive research on games. And what do you want to say about this?
It's very, very hard to resist. You basically think of it as you're going fishing for people's attention. And if you've got the hook and the line and you're basically trying to build as many lures onto the line as you can. And when you're designing a product like this, you can't do it in a way that's foolproof where you know for sure it's going to succeed. But you can build in as many of these hooks as you can. Things like variable reward, which is what happens when you play a slot machine, or the goals that you get for passing a level, or the social connection you get with a lot of these games because they involve other people. And so when you build all of these features into the game, you raise the chance that the game's going to be hard to resist. And so this is a very common story. It is very, very difficult to stop playing once you begin.
Well, Dr. Rear, we're not going back in time. I mean, young adults are going to have smartphones. So what are parents supposed to do?
So, Amir, you're in what I would call an echo chamber.
right? So an echo chamber is when we continuously microdose on a certain type of content so that the behavior or the belief becomes normalized for us. And echo chambers are playing out across this country, whether it's around politics, whether it's around niche ideas, or whether it's around behaviors online. So what do we do about that? How do we have these conversations? What I tend to say is if someone in your life is in an echo chamber, instead of debating them on the minutia of that echo chamber, in your home or at the Thanksgiving table with Uncle such and such who believes this, step away from the actual detail and look at the technological processes at play together. Look at the technology that is feeding this addiction, that is feeding this belief, and then together decide that you want to push back against it because you have the power to do that. And then we break.
How are you going to do that when that's not what he wants to do? How are you going to do that?
Because we start to talk about the addictive quality of these technological processes and make it us against that technology. Instead of us being against each other, we are all in this together.
Thank you. I do have a question. I remember you stated that they're considered products and not consumers.
Yeah.
And I was telling him about and wanted to share the story. Whoever comes up and designed these games are genius because at one point we spent all of our money on PlayStations. They made it so now convenient to where now he's playing on a PC. So it's easy access now. We're not spending as much money. So that's my thing. They're making it even more accessible for kids and teens and adults.
Dr. Weezing, there is a treatment though for this, right?
There
You
are
actually are
treatments for
treating
behavioral
kids who are going through this.
Yeah, so there are treatments for behavioral addictions. The first treatment is looking at psychotherapies, things like cognitive behavioral therapy. And in the case of Amir, you may want to think about motivational interviewing. Basically, it's a type of therapy that meets people where they're at, thinks about what your motivation might be to change this behavior, and works you towards coming up with a plan to get you ready, willing, and able to take action.
But isn't it like every addiction, though, the person has to be willing themselves, not just your parents or not just your person
Absolutely.
in school or not just that person has to say, I have a problem and I want to now fix this, right?
Absolutely. And so at this point, Amir, you'd have to assess where your motivation is at to get to a place where you do exactly what Ms. Winfrey just said, which is that I'm ready to make a change and then start implementing a plan to do so. The other thing to think about is that there are medications, off-label medications that have been effective in alcohol use disorders and for opioid use disorders that work in certain kinds of behavioral addiction like naltrexone. And then in addition to that, addictions tend to have common co-occurring psychiatric diagnoses. And it makes sense to get an evaluation to see if you might struggle from depression. Some of the symptoms that you're describing have a lot of overlap with that. Anxiety disorders like social phobia or generalized anxiety can sometimes overlap with addictions, in addition to other impulse control disorders, ADHD, psychotic disorders. So getting evaluated for that and getting treatment can actually help with the behavioral addiction if there's a component of that to it.
So I'll stop right there. And let me go back to the screen here. I want you to kind of reflect, if you're still with me, and I hope you are, about the addictive nature of video gaming. We're going to go through a little bit of, some of the reasons here in a second, or some of the signs. But it's interesting because I think technology, we are addicted to technology, right? We're addicted to our phones. We're addicted to playing video games. I mean, I could make the argument that prior to any of that, there was probably way too much time spent in my childhood probably watching television, right? There's always an inherent risk. But I think there's certainly, listening to some of this, Oprah and her guests talk, is that, it's certainly easier, I think, to make video gaming addictive. And honestly, there's not an incentive for video game manufacturers to really stop, right? Because you're buying their product, right? So I wanted to say the World Health Organization, by the way, actually defines something called they actually define a gaming disorder. It's in the 11th revision of the International Classification of Diseases. as a pattern of gaming behavior, digital gaming or video gaming, characterized by impaired control over gaming, increasing priority given to gaming over other activities to the extent that gaming takes precedence over other interests and daily activities, and continuation or escalation of gaming despite the occurrence of negative consequences. So it says for gaming disorder to be diagnosed, the behavior pattern must be severe enough that it results in a significant impairment to a person's functioning in personal, family, social, educational, occupational, or other important areas, and would normally have been evident for at least 12 months. So you think about it, you probably have somebody you know that might be addicted to, video gaming, or just constantly shutting themselves off from the world, being so much more isolated because of this kind of technology. So reflect on that. But here's some numbers here. 1 in 10 kids are considered pathological. In fact, I have a number in my notes right here in front of me. A 2011 study of more than 3,000 third through eighth graders from Singapore. 1 in 10 were considered pathological gamers, meaning their gaming addiction was jeopardizing multiple areas of their lives, including school, social, and family relations. The more the children were addicted, the more they were prone to depression, social phobias, and increased anxiety, which led to poorer grades at school. And these numbers are similar in the United States, China, and Germany. Gender is also a factor in game addiction. Males more than females, for sure. And games are meant to be habit forming, right? For sure. And they're done through what's called microtransactions. Think about it, loot boxes, etc. There's all these apps that you download on your phone, and hey, if you want, like Fortnite offers all these different like skins and benefits to characters, and there was a story of a guy playing that FIFA soccer game that was trying to get a Ronaldo character and ran up like a $5,000 bill on his parents' credit card or whatnot. So anyway, microtransactions are very much contribute to the addictive nature of the gaming universe. And again, I think because we've talked about this in person many times, they are something that gaming manufacturers make a lot of money with, because, hey, for 10 cents or $1, or hey, for 99 cents, whatever, and you've got a credit card on file, suddenly, you're just nickel and diming your way into a very addictive nature for you, but a very profitable existence for the gaming manufacturer themselves. So it's a business model where users can purchase virtual goods with micropayments, and they're often used in free-to-play games to provide a revenue source for video game developers. So here are some symptoms, by the way. Are you anxious or miserable when not playing? Do you have sleep disruptions? Does your mood change? Are you losing sleep or just playing through the night? How late are you staying up playing video games? Is it affecting what you're supposed to be doing the next day? Do you need to play longer with more intensity? Are you lying to yourself and to others about how much time you spend actually doing these things? Are you skipping meals? Is it more important to be on your game rather than eat? Right? And is it affecting your work or school performance? Something to think about. Again, I'm not preaching. I'm just saying that these are real world concerns when it comes to the addictive nature of video gaming. All right. There's also other concerns too. Violence and misogyny, right? Most games involving combat are intentionally violent, and the personality traits of players may be of more concern than of that violent content in games. But the question is, just because you're playing a violent video game, does that mean you're going to be a violent person? There's been this age-old debate many, many times of dare I say, when we have someone ultimately an active shooter to school, a lot of times investigators or the police will start to investigate whether someone had some kind of was a video game player. But I think even more than that, I think it's just a matter of, was this person just socially isolating himself or herself, and was like basically being the ability just to sit there on their phone or on their gaming console hour after hour, not having to deal with anybody, kind of play their game. Was that kind of contributing to this sort of isolated nature? So look up a guy named Adam Lanza. There was a shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary School several years ago, and there was some talk of of Lanza being a frequent video game user, and some people were trying to tie his like isolated nature of being a video gamer to later, the crime itself, and I don't know. So look it up. All right. Gender-based harassment in gameplay in the industry is also an issue. Women and men don't differ substantially in the kind of games they like to play, but women are more likely to play alone and offline due to the unwelcoming environment of online gaming. So there's been a lot of, comments made during, when they're on the headset, guys are on the headset or on Discord or however they're communicating with themselves while they're playing their games. There's been, of course, a lot of racist comments that they come out during these things, and obviously misogynistic comments, and basically women are more likely to play alone and offline due to the unwelcoming environment of an online gaming chat. I don't know if you fall in that category. You've had an example or had a friend talk to you about that. Gamer harassment of LGBTQ plus people is also a concern. There's allegedly a lot of terminology being thrown around during gameplay that can be considered offensive, right? And some gamers resort to using voice changing software, just sit out of voice chats altogether. So there's definitely, along with addiction, by the way, addiction is your code word. Addiction is your code word. Addiction is your code word for part 2. So just so you know that. All right. Here's the percentage of women gamers who report toxic comments and actions from male gamers. This covers from 2019 to 2022. And you can see 72%, and it's climbed from 34% to 72%. And I think, maybe there was some I think along with the fact that politically we're getting so much more like split apart, I think a lot of it started during the COVID era, where we started losing kind of, I think, respect for each other online, just my humble opinion. And so I don't think that it's surprising to me that it's climbed as substantially as it has, because I think the deeper we get into social media, the deeper we get into video gaming, which is also online, the more we seem to be just vicious to each other, and we're not immune. All right, how about benefits? Okay, there are some benefits, obviously, to video gaming. I don't want to say it's all negative, right? Definitely improves coordination, it improves problem-solving skills, enhances memory, improves attention and concentration. I mean, one thing I can say is when I started out playing video games, it was one joystick, one button. Now, of course, it's a full-on, your fingers are doing different things and you're having to think different ways. And I think that's amazing, right? It's a great source of learning, improves the brain speed. It definitely, this could be, pro or con, enhances multitasking skills, right? The ability to kind of do several things at once. But, I do think anyone that knows a gamer knows that when you're trying to tell them something while they're playing a game, a lot of times they're not focusing on anything else. I see the same thing happen when someone's on a phone. And then, of course, you could say that video gaming's improved social skills from the standpoint that, particularly for those games that are played in a community, if you will, online community environment, a lot of, talking back and forth and a lot of collaboration. And so that's kind of cool. Here's why people play video games, by the way. It brings them joy. 86% say that's the biggest reason. It also provides mental stimulation. 83% says it's a stress reliever. I'd agree with that. Sometimes you just got to unwind. Again, it goes back to leisure time from the very early days of those, those arcades, right? And you can see the numbers there. So 86% though say it provides joy, close behind mental stimulation and relieving stress. All right, let's talk the business. This will be the last thing we do in this lecture for Chapter 3, the business of digital gaming. And you can find that actually if you want to review this, page 82 of your textbook. But basically, for years, for one thing, game publishers release games to the public and game developers write codes for the game. So there's developers that work within sometimes that work within the same company, and then there are sometimes game developers that work independently that work with game publishers, to release games to the public, right? So For years, two major components of the gaming industry have been console makers and game publishers. The biggest blockbuster games are still produced and distributed by the leading game publishers, and many are designed to be played on the three leading game consoles connected to big monitors. At the same time, the emergence of game platforms on mobile devices and social networks has expanded the game market and brought new game publishers into the field. So the three major console makers also publish their own games, right? Sometimes making the games proprietary, meaning they will only play on that company's system. For example, Microsoft famously began publishing its Halo game series to drive sales of Xbox. Similarly, Sony famously began publishing its Halo game series to drive sales of the Xbox. Sorry, my bad. Similarly, Sony publishes the Uncharted game series just for PlayStation, and Nintendo publishes the Legend of Zelda series solely for its gaming platforms. More often, however, game publishers are independent companies distributing games that play across multiple platforms. Sometimes these publishers are also the developers, the people who write the actual code for the games. Other times, these publishers serve as distributors for the game developers. In the same way that film studios may distribute the work of independent filmmakers, Activision, Blizzard, and Electronic Arts historically have been the two leading game publishers. So they are actually publishing games, but they're not necessarily they're independent, if you will, of the actual console makers, right? So it's not like but of course those lines are starting to blur now. Activision Blizzard was actually created through the merging of Activision and Vivendi's Blizzard Entertainment division in 2008. The Activision half of the company got its start in the 70s as the first independent game developer and distributor, initially providing games for the Atari platforms. Activision was unique in it rewarded its developers with royalty payments and name credits on game box covers, something that hadn't yet been considered by other game publishers, which kept their developers anonymous. As a result, top game designers and programmers migrated to Activision, and Activision began to produce a number of top-selling games, including the X-Men series, the Call of Duty series, and Guitar Hero. Meanwhile, Blizzard Entertainment, established in 1991 as an independent game publisher, has three famous franchises in game publishing: Diablo, StarCraft, and World of Warcraft. It's widely praised Overwatch, which created in 2016, reached 35 million players in a little over a year and has become Blizzard's fourth major franchise, particularly as a result of its becoming a widely used team-based first-person shooter game for esports. As one merged company, Activision Blizzard has become a publishing giant in the industry, expanding its offerings even further by purchasing mobile and social game maker King, which owns Candy Crush and Saga, in 2016. Anyway, and then you have Electronic Arts, which is now being publicly traded on the NASDAQ. And of course, I think EA, a lot of people, when they think of EA, they think of EA Sports, John Madden football, NBA, that kind of thing. That's another huge, company. All right. As for what happens when a game is being, created from concept to actually distribution, there's actually three major areas. One is called development. The second one is called licensing. And the third one is called marketing. So basically, AAA game titles, games that represent the current standard for technical excellence, can cost as much as a blockbuster film to make and promote. For example, The Lost of Us Part 2 in 2020, an action-adventure game for the PlayStation 4 and 5, cost $220 million and took almost 6 years to create, with production starting right after the release of its original game in 2013. So obviously the money is huge. Well, you have development. That's the largest part of the development budget. Money spent designing, coding, scoring, and testing a game goes to paying talent, digital artists, and game testers. And each new generation of gaming platforms doubles the number of people involved in designing, programming, and mixing digitalized images and sounds. That being said, the advent of mobile gaming has provided a new entry point for independent game developers. Whereas the cost of making a major console game is in the millions of dollars, the price is substantially lower for mobile game creation. So when you're creating something for a console, significantly more money than actually creating one for a phone, which I think is interesting. There's also licensing, right? Which is independent game makers must deal with two types of licensing. First, they must pay royalties to the console makers or manufacturers, I should say. So that'd be Microsoft, Microsoft, Sony, or Nintendo for the right to distribute a game using their system. So basically, they negotiate a price. So, like, if I create a video game and I want to distribute it on one of those major platforms, I've got to come to a financial agreement where the parent company, Nintendo, Sony, Microsoft, is making money on whatever I'm doing, and I'm also making money. So that's called royalties, right? So these royalties vary from $3 to $10 per unit sold. Of course, if a console manufacturer such as Nintendo makes games exclusively for the Wii, then it doesn't have to pay a console royalty to itself, right? The other form of licensing involves intellectual property, stories, characters, personalities, and music that require licensing agreements. In 2005, for example, John Madden, a football coach, by the way, who recently passed away, well, a couple of years ago, I should say. A lot of people know Madden football. Well, that's based on John Madden, a former football coach, NFL an NFL coach for the Raiders. He reportedly signed a $150 million deal with EA Sports in 2005 that allowed the company to use his name and likeness for the next 10 years. Once that deal expired, Madden, who died in 2021, continued to license his name and image under new financial terms, while the NFL also licensed its league for exclusive use in the Madden NFL series, signing a $1.5 billion extension with EA from 2021 to 2026. About $1 billion will go to the NFL and $500 million will go to the players union. So everybody's making money, right? And then last but not least, of course, you have marketing, which often matches or exceeds development costs. And basically, the marketing costs of launching a digital game often equal or exceed those development costs. The successful launch of a game involves online promotions, banner ads, merchandise, and the most expensive element of all, movie-like trailers. In many ways, the marketing blitz associated with introducing a major new franchise title, including a cinematic trailer, resembles the promotional campaign surrounding the debut of a blockbuster movie. For example, data released in 2023 revealed that for some publishers, development costs for AAA games can range from $90 million to $180 million, with marketing costs adding another $50 to $150 million. One unnamed game publisher reported that a major game franchise had production costs of $600 million and marketing expenses almost the same amount. So that's over $1 billion. So clearly, this industry, on par, if not significantly, can exceed the film industry based on those numbers. All right, almost done here. Commercialism is prevalent in digital games. You might have heard the term advergame, which is video games created for purely promotional purposes. They're similar to infomercials. Chester Cheetah had video games in the past, those advergames, which were very interesting. I don't know if I have another example here. Chester Cheetah, the official mascot for Cheeto Snacks, starred in 2 video games for the Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo systems. That was in 1992. In-game advertisements are more subtle. In-game advertising companies like Anzu, FramePlay, and BidStack integrate ads into games as billboards, logos, or storefronts. So if you're playing a video game, you often will see like advertising in the background that is there, but not like in your face. So some can be altered remotely and tailored based on numerous factors. And of course, being it's digital, it can often change with greater frequency. So anyway, and a very interesting chapter, very long part 2 there. So I apologize. But again, if you've gotten to the end of this, your part 2 keyword is addiction, addiction, addiction. So you throw that on there, I will give you credit. Anyway, we'll see you again when we get to chapter 4, which is going to be all about preview time, sound recording and popular music. So that'll be a fun chapter to watch as well. Okay, have a great day.